Okay, so we're going to switch now from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and we're going to move to talking about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so, again, a piece of a law of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act, which is extremely important to us as educators because it certainly impacts children with disabilities in our schools. And so important things to remember that it's not a special education law. It's a civil rights law. So there's a difference. It's monitored via civil rights in terms of a whole different office and department in Washington, D.C., in our government. It's not a specific law as IDEA is, and it does not contain any funding. It's a law that looks at discrimination primarily, preventing discrimination. Um, Section 504, it's brief but powerful, very, very powerful. So it's part of this Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it does extend to individuals with disabilities. So there are protections, of course, based on discrimination. And the law, direct wording from the law says that no otherwise qualified individual with a disability shall solely by reason of the disability be excluded from participation in, be denied benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program that receives federal funding. And so, since our schools receive federal funding, our children with disabilities are covered under Section 504. So who is protected under Section 504? The law does not get as specific as the IDEA law does. Um, Persons with disabilities are defined as those having a physical or mental impairment. And so a physical or mental disability and has a record of such impairment. So again, that's about as specific as we get. So very global definition related to disability. But there are examples, of course, of physical impairments, and so children with epilepsy, AIDS, allergies, arthritis, heart disease, Tourette syndrome, cerebral palsy, visual impairment, broken bones, cancer, diabetes, hemophilia, and temporary conditions. Certainly a broken limb is temporary, but during that time period, the child may be entitled to a Section 504 plan. Example of mental impairments would include children with ADHD, a reading disability, depression, eating disorders, conduct disorders, substance abuse, and social maladjustment. So you should be noting there are some children that will be included under Section 504 that are definitely not included in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, such as our children with social maladjustment or substance abuse. And Section 504, though, does talk about that these disabilities, whether physical or mental, have to impact major life activities. So what are major life activities? Breathing, walking, talking, seeing, hearing, learning, and taking care of oneself. And when Section 504 of the Act was amended, they added other functional life activities, such as eating, sleeping, standing, lifting, bending, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating. So, because it's a anti-discrimination law, how might a school be considered discriminatory? By failing to provide physical access to programs for children, by imposing any double standards on extracurricular activities, by failing to design regular classroom programs to meet the child's needs, because children that have a Section 504 plan will be in general education. This is a plan that provides access to education. Okay, so that's important. It's an access plan that, unlike our IDEA, Individualized Education Plan, which provides specially designed instruction and related services, This Section 504 provides access. So it requires accessibility to all educational programs, and they, the building has to be accessible. Programs have to be accessible. FAPE is part of Section 504, so we do use some of the same language. The child has to have a free and appropriate education. We also look to evaluating, and we look to individualized education, but individualized education that provides accommodations to access the general education curriculum. Provided in the child's least restrictive environment is important, okay, as well as due process is built into this law as well. Again, Section 504, children, if they only have that plan, they are generally educated in the general education classroom. Examples of violations might be failing to provide adequate staffing, equipment, facilities, failing to provide opportunity for least restrictive environment, and any services that the child will need to access the curriculum and the extracurricular activities, essentially the child's whole education. Failing to carry out the plan, failing to carry out if the child also has a Section 504 plan and an IEP, failing to carry out both. Again, supplementary aids and services may be important, so failing to carry out that section as well. Failing to provide the student with properly trained teachers, failing to give the student those services listed in the plan. Failure to provide the full amount of the services called for in the plan, and shortening any of the school day for the child. So that takes us through part 1 of Section 504.